So, Mad Stano, you are the Senior Legal Counsel for Energy Equity at the Greenlining Institute. And the transition from Panama, talking about a just transition and what kind of policies we need to make, hopefully cues you up to give your decarbonization pathways to a just transition, environmental justice and energy equity talk. Honored to have you here. Thank you. I really appreciate you bringing the Greenlining Institute's thinking to the topic. It's so critical.
Thank you so much for the opportunity, and hello to everyone. And I'm excited and fired up after Panama's presentation, so thank you for that to Panama.
Yeah, Panama. Can you bring your slides up?
Yes. So can you all see this?
Yes.
And I will put it in presentation view. And we're off. Good afternoon, everyone. As Sean said, my name is Mad Stano. I'm with the Greenlining Institute, which, if you're not familiar, is a racial justice nonprofit in Oakland, California. A little bit about my background. So I'm an attorney and a teacher and sometimes an organizer, an asthmatic, a renter, and I got passionate about energy equity issues, specifically at the start of my career working as a community-based attorney with residents impacted by oil and gas pollution in California, San Joaquin Valley, at the Center on Race, Poverty, and the Environment. And today we're going to talk together about a just transition and how it fits into building decarbonization, one of my favorite topics. And just to get us warmed up in terms of what is a just transition, it means a lot of things to a lot of different people. And one definition that I'll introduce to you is via two photos outside my window a few weeks apart. And the left is a stellar jay in the peak of our air pollution associated with wildfires across the state. And 2 weeks later is a photo of the exact same bird, if I'm not mistaken, outside my window. So when we're talking about building decarbonization, we're talking about climate, we're talking about home, we're talking about making the places that we live, work, and play that have cultural, spiritual significance to us, safe and accessible for everyone. So I am an attorney by training, so it's an occupational hazard that I offer a roadmap. We're going to offer a little bit of Environmental Justice 101 to ground ourselves in that, talk about some of the EJ impacts and strategies associated with building decarbonization and electrification. We're going to talk about some community-led solutions, the how and the why of some of those community-led solutions, and then I'm going to offer a case study that also connects to those same individuals that I was talking to you about in the San Joaquin Valley. So getting into Environmental Justice 101. Unfortunately, I've used this cartoon in presentations across the United States over the past several years and for various audiences. And unfortunately, it resonates with everyone as self-explanatory, right? That we externalize the cost of industrialization and a lot of existing infrastructure and comforts onto low-income people, and that has a tremendous impact on their quality of life, access to the environment. And there's a direct relationship between the benefits that some people are experiencing and enjoying at the burden of other individuals. But there's one important factor that's missing from this cartoon when we're talking about environmental injustice, and that's race. And so this is our Columbine Screen map that is showing environmental and social vulnerabilities across California, and you're likely familiar with this map, but what I wanted to bring to your attention is the racial makeup, that as the number of sources of pollution in a community increase, and as the social vulnerabilities such as linguistic isolation, educational attainment, and other factors that magnify the impacts of environmental exposures, the cumulative impact of that pollution, as those burdens go up, They are much more likely to occur in communities of color across California. And you can see in comparison to the percentages of the racial makeup of our state, which is the bottom part of the bar graph, as you go to the more overburdened percentiles within CalEnviroScreen, the number of residents of color also increases. So when we're talking about environmental justice, it is a social movement, which from a historical perspective, you can start hundreds of years ago. And from the modern perspective, we're dating our principles to the 1991 First People of Color Conference, where a bunch of environmental justice activists came together to put forward a definition and principles of environmental justice. So we're talking about the environmental injustices before, but these are the affirmative values and rights. And you can see from the slide that they are intersectional. They recognize the rights of Mother Nature. And when we're talking about environmental justice, we're really talking about how race and class are the categories and communities that face toxic assault in our political economy. We are talking about self-determination and communities impacted by pollution's right to speak for themselves and have a meaningful role in decision-making, which historically that they have been denied. When we're talking about the environment, we're talking about homes and communities. We're talking about corrective justice, so recognizing past harms and working to make people and communities whole. Procedural justice, so those decision-making structures and processes, and distributive justice, the actual outcomes that increase folks' quality of life. And the tributaries of the river of environmental justice include the African American civil rights movement, the anti-toxics movement, academia, indigenous organizers and activists, labor, and traditional environmentalists. So in defining energy equity, we're talking about no false choices between access, safety, affordability, health, labor rights, climate justice, and economic justice. We are offering the following affirmative principles. Energy should be affordable so that no one has to go without. Energy should be clean so that no one is harmed by fossil fuel pollution. Energy should be resilient so that it is there when we need it. And that communities of color must play a lead role in our transition to a clean energy economy as beneficiaries, as decision makers, and as the entrepreneurs and workers that will build our clean energy future. So how does this relate to building decarbonization and electrification? A little bit on the power sector side for natural gas. We won't spend too much time here, but building electrification is in part an environmental justice issue because of discriminatory and disproportionate siting of natural gas power plants in California. So here, as the CalEnviroScreen score goes up, the number of power plants, natural gas power plants, also increases. I know folks already spoke to the health impacts of residential gas appliances on indoor air quality and public health this morning, but I'll just talk about it in terms of disproportionate burdens. So this report from April of 2020 focused on indoor and outdoor air pollution from gas appliances. They found that pollution associated with various acute and chronic health effects have a disproportionate impact on low-income people, renters, and disadvantaged communities experiencing dangerous levels of air pollution already. And as I talked about with CalEnviroScreen, right, the same amount of pollution in a particular person or community has a different effect according to cumulative impact science, because some people are carrying heavier burdens already. So the fact that these appliances are having a disproportionate impact effect on environmental justice communities is concerning, because they're already more vulnerable to the health and social well-being impacts of pollution more broadly. And they've been denied a procedural justice throughout the local land use and various agency level and elected official decisions that have created our energy system and energy status quo. So UCL researchers found that after an hour of cooking on a gas stove, 98% of smaller apartments had peak levels of NOx that exceeded the state and national air quality standards. So the air quality inside of nearly every apartment that was studied was so bad it would be illegal if measured outside. So reductions in air pollution from electrification of residential gas appliances will benefit the communities that are now most burdened with the worst air quality, not just in California, but also across the country. These are just some of the health effects, but since that was covered, we'll just state that they are significant in environmental justice communities. They're facing a lot of both point sources and mobile sources of pollution. So once again, the effects of natural gas pollution from appliances is in relationship with those other sources of pollution like hazardous waste siting, logistics industry, etc. Getting into another portion, which is the barriers for environmental justice communities in accessing the benefits of building electrification and more broadly, our transition to clean tech and cleaner energy across the state. California Energy Commission, as a requirement of Senate Bill 350, issued the first part of the low-income barriers study in December of 2016, identifying some of the barriers for these communities in accessing subsidized programs and market transformation programs and utility scale programs to either incentivize or introduce cleaner technologies. So some of the structural barriers that they found were low home ownership rates, complex needs in terms of ownership and financial arrangements, insufficient access to capital, building age, and remote or underserved communities. They also found a series of policy barriers, so market delivery, the energy providers, the utilities, the government agencies share a unsatisfactory and unsuccessful track record in delivering benefits to these communities. There were barriers with program integration. So we have a lot of strong programs that could be leveraged together, but are very difficult to navigate and often, especially for low income and EJ communities, require a lot of technical assistance to even access. We have data limitations, and a lot of our investment cost effectiveness tests do not recognize the non-energy benefits of something like building electrification, including the air quality improvements, the potential affordability, health, safety, comfort, workforce development opportunities. And then there are additional burdens, right? The energy burden, meaning the percentage of someone's income, a household's income that's going on energy expenses, the extremely high rate of disconnections that we have in California from energy and other utility services, and then access to services and technologies more broadly. So this is a visualization from a June 2020 UCLA study where researchers were looking at energy sufficiency and the need for new policies to combat growing inequities in the residential energy sector. So they're analyzing the degree to which disadvantaged communities have been able to participate in and benefit from California's energy transformations. And it remains far from equal. So using data at the zip code level within Los Angeles County, they document the scale and to the extent at which disadvantaged communities continue to be left behind on electric vehicle, plug-in hybrid electric vehicle, rooftop solar, energy consumption, and participation in state energy transformation programs. So as you can see on the graph, the higher the CalEnviroScreen percentile, meaning the more environmentally and socially overburdened communities, the lower the clean tech access across these three. And then while they're not displayed here, the study goes into several other programs. So there's a strong and consistent negative relationship. And this is all 2018 data. So additionally, the study found that electricity and natural gas consumption within disadvantaged communities are on average about half of those seen in their affluent counterparts, and they're facing greater rates of disconnection. So electrifying higher and upper income, what they describe as excessive energy consumers, the greenhouse gas abatement is even more marginal because of their starting point higher energy use. Um, and I show this graph, and one of our common refrains at Greenlining is that trickle down equity doesn't exist. So market transformation programs that are focused on wealthier earlier adopters are often wildly insufficient to meet the needs and existing infrastructure of environmental justice communities. And we learned that through some of the earlier in California's history clean tech programs and investments. Getting to affordability and the energy burden. The baseline in California, household costs in this graph, we're showing before COVID-19, and obviously these are even more pronounced during our current economic recession in California. But it's showing household costs that include rent or mortgage and utilities from a California Budget Center July 2020 report. And it shows that our starting point for energy affordability and housing affordability, which of course is related to building electrification, our starting point is extremely dangerous for many low-income Californians. So any increase in gas or electric rates for so many low-income people is unacceptable and immediately raises energy insecurity. The energy burden, so low-income people pay 3 times as much of their percentage of income on energy than their wealthier counterparts. We also have problems of the split incentive and unique situation for renters, where it's difficult to direct savings to a tenant that have to do with building electrification. And then we have wealthier communities potentially in the building electrification scenario leaving the gas system. And the concern is that the lower income ratepayers left on the gas system, regardless of their choice about whether or not to be on that system, will be left with extremely high rising costs. And you can see also, right, that this data is presented showing that we had significant housing costs burdens prior to COVID-19 across several income groups and with a disproportionate impact on Black and Latinx Californians. So what do we do? Hopefully I've sold you now that building electrification is an environmental justice and energy equity and racial justice issue with the disproportionate impacts of our energy system right now burdening low-income communities of color and the barriers that many of them face to accessing our clean energy transformation. So what is our vision to move out of that? So an equitable energy transition that must center the communities most impacted by pollution, poverty, and climate change in both design, benefits, and implementation. So here's some recommendations that we put together for the GridWorks, California's gas system in transition report in 2019 that we participated in. Bill protections for low-income people, programs and resources to enable especially low-income electrification, one-stop shop for all program offerings, a barrier study specific to low-income electrification, meaningful community engagement at every step in the process, and ensure low-income people and disadvantaged communities are included in and benefit from a gas transition. So Greenlining released a report in 2019 on equitable electrification with energy efficiency for all coalition and the insight of many of our community partners that puts out a framework. So these are our versions of why electrify buildings, right? Healthier homes, saving money and energy, expanding access to energy services, cleaner air, local clean energy jobs, and a sustainable environment. And once again, we're looking at building electrification, not from a technology or even a climate frame exclusively. We're trying to look at through a holistic lens of what's going to improve people's lives and what's it like to live with these technologies in their home and in their communities. So we developed a 5-step process: assessing, establishing, and developing, and leveraging, tracking, and improving performance. So we're really focusing on local community needs, establishing community-led decision-making, having equity-driven metrics. That's another problem across a lot of California's clean energy investment programs. Those are lacking, as well as our fossil fuel-based programs, citing it otherwise, right? We're not looking at those non-energy benefits or social costs of carbon or air toxics. We're gonna leverage program benefits and funding, and we are going to continue, hopefully, to evolve with every step and stage. And I want to spend a little bit of time talking about the San Joaquin Valley Affordable Energy Pilots, which started as a bill passed by Perea, of all legislators, in 2014, that's working to identify the communities that lack affordable energy access. These were communities historically redlined out of natural gas service. And what we found in the research was there was evidence of racial animus for that denial. And then also throughout time, service wasn't extended for stated cost effectiveness or economic feasibility reasons from the utilities. There are over 170 communities across the San Joaquin Valley that meet this statutory criteria of particularly disadvantaged communities that, as a result of being redlined out of natural gas service, are relying on propane, wood burning, or quite honestly, going without energy services in their home that many people assume that everyone in California has access to. The statute also requires analyzing the economic feasibility of extending natural gas lines to these communities historically denied, increasing subsidies, and then every attorney's favorite broad category of other measures. And what came out of this bill that was really focused on, at that time, getting gas to people that were denied gas, has expanded into a multi-year community-led grassroots victory, where the Public Utilities Commission really put 3 community-based organizations and residents of 12 communities within the 170 that I mentioned to lead a community design of 12 energy pilots, 11 of which were funded in the San Joaquin Valley to provide alternatives to wood burning, propane, and other extremely high pollution, dangerous, and very expensive sources of fuel. This process, some of the things that we learned, so the community-based organizations, the Center on Race, Poverty, and the Environment, Leadership Council for Justice and Accountability, and Self-Help Enterprises collectively had 80 years of experience serving these communities. And they held community meeting after community meeting to identify all of the actual specifics about folks' energy services in their homes, about what they were interested in, what they were nervous about, what they were spending money on, and what's their vision for their personal just transition vision in their home. Some of the best practices for outreach that I think were really successful that I want to lift up is that the CBOs, as I mentioned, were in a leadership role. So the commission required specific filings to incorporate this rich community specific data on what people were interested in and concerned about into the record, which is atypical for a CPUC proceeding. There was in-language, accessible, community-led, and facilitated outreach. These were trusted organizations. They were conducting meetings in Spanish, and folks spoke in languages, and in language that was accessible, culturally competent, and relevant to the individuals. There were many different outreach methods deployed. There was door-to-door, there were emails, there were phone calls, there were in-person meetings, there were pizza parties, there was a lot of sustained outreach to get to the design and introduction of these pilots. The outreach took place over months with close community coordination. Community preference was critical for pilot selection. So 9 of the 11 pilots have some elements of building electrification for the communities that have not been met by other targeted building electrification programs. And it provided funding for the community-based organization. So it put self-help enterprises in the role of a community energy navigator to help with the implementation and evaluation of these pilots moving forward, because that community on the ground trusted voice is extremely important for enrollment and for ensuring folks have a beneficial experience in the pilots. And as a result of all that rich community engagement, each of the pilots have what are called, in the language of the decision, common community elements: outreach and education. So I mentioned the community energy navigator. Each of them have bill savings. So we wanted both protection from the rebound effect, which in the San Joaquin Valley context was different than what has been studied before. A lot of the utilities and other folks stated there will be bill savings, we promise. But they assumed a level of energy use that was incorrect, because many families were going without energy services. And if they have access to new technologies and safer technologies, we don't have an accurate baseline for their behavior. So the rebound effect was different in this situation. And also, as I mentioned, there was evidence of racial animus denying them energy service, which is a legal civil injury. And so they're entitled to restitution. So they should have bill savings from these programs. We had tenant protections in each of them. This is a significant financial investment. There's property remediation funds for these pilots. The existing infrastructure of the households and of the community grid infrastructure required a lot of investment. And so we wanted to make sure tenants were protected subsequent to that investment. We have workforce training and local hiring requirements. We have appliance warranties. We don't want to experiment on low income and vulnerable individuals that have suffered a legal injury. And then we also have community data gathering. One of the challenges of many California clean energy pilots and programs is that we don't actually ask people if they liked it qualitatively, what worked for them, what didn't work for them, did they trust the implementers, did they not trust the implementers, the things that will be really relevant to scaling some of these solutions across the state to the hundreds of communities, right, that need critical investment. So some new recommendations for GridWorks Part 2, these are unpublished and from some of our allies, but I'm sharing them with you all. So some final recommendations: assume all gas is off the system. We need an end date, right? No combustion, no false solutions. We need beneficial pilots. Once again, I can never say it enough, we need bill protections for low-income people. We need to make whole the communities that bear a disproportionate burden of the existing gas system. So those low-income communities of color, by directing the benefits of the transition there. To the extent that externalities exist from a transition as a result of moving away from gas, the responsible party should pay the cost, not ratepayers generally. As you saw from the San Joaquin Valley example, localized solutions are needed to address extreme regional diversity. So the pilots and the design and the features, there's a lot to learn for the rest of the state, but those were particular, right, to the local details and preferences of those individuals. And we need to optimize the non-energy benefits of the transition, both participant, utility, and societal. And with that, thank you so much for time.
Thank you. Thank you, Matt. That was fantastic. I, I, I don't think we actually tried to coordinate the transition in your talk and Panama's, but that was, well, this is the topic of the day. So there are some comments and questions over here on the side that I would totally appreciate if you took a moment to chat with people about. And I think all of you got to witness this conversation, like what would be the high road? What would be the way to do this right? You know, can we please learn from the countless mistakes we've made in doing injustice and do it right? And Matt, that was a fantastic walkthrough of what does it look like to do it right. So good. Thank you.